you can hear me. Okay, so my name is Jennifer Hancock, and I'm a humanist, and this is Ask a Humanist. So it's a half-hour program that I do once a month. If anybody's got a question about humanism, email me. I'll see if I can address it. I try to answer 3 questions. There we go. Three questions per episode, and they can be really basic. They can be esoteric, philosophical. Obviously, it's philosophy. Let's start with a question I got from someone about who was struggling with the issue of whether humanists are vegetarians. How does a humanist view the question of animal rights as it relates to vegetarianism? And the answer is that we don't have a consensus. There's a lot of humanists who are vegetarians, who don't eat meat for philosophic reasons, and there's other humanists that do and don't see any problem with it. So the problem with humanism, with an ethics based on compassion and applied with reason, and that has no dogma, is that different people using the same value system can come to very different conclusions about what is or is not moral. And that annoys a lot of people, but we kind of feel it's better than having a dogma. You know, it's just one of those things. So, yeah, there is no consensus on it. In general, when it comes to animal rights and animal welfare, almost all humanists will agree on the concept of animal welfare. What we might not agree with is the concept of animal rights. And that's mostly because in order to have rights, you have to have responsibility. And until a tiger can respect my rights as a human and not eat me, you know, I'll care for it, make sure it's got, you know, a territory to live in, but am I going to give it the same rights as I would someone who can consciously decide whether or not to harm other people or not? That's kind of where I draw the line. And again, plenty of humanists are vegetarians, some of us aren't, and there is no consensus on that. And that comes to a larger problem, I think, that humanists have. It's not really a problem. But when you have a compassion-based ethic that's rationally applied, a lot of what is determined to be good or not good is in effect based on what that person knows. And we all know different things, and we all have different experiences coming into this thing. So again, not a consensus. And this brings us to the issue of, you know, how do humanists create consensus on values? Because there are things that almost all humanists agree on, like a woman should have a right to choose whether or not to be pregnant. Almost all, not all, but the overwhelming majority of humanists agree on that. We almost all agree that the death penalty is a human rights abuse. And if you've been around humanists for any length of time, you'll know that's nothing short of miraculous, because when it comes to coming up with a consensus, we're really big on not agreeing. We really do try to think for ourselves and to come to our own conclusions. So when we do agree on something that we as humanists consider moral, I would recommend to other people that they look into why humanists have taken that stance, because we don't agree on anything. We don't agree on anything. Should we have gone into Iraq or not? All right, you had prominent humanists like Christopher Hitchens saying that, you know, going into Iraq militarily was a moral thing to do, and you had a whole bunch of other people who were absolutely opposed to going into Iraq, and they were all humanists, and they were all applying the same set of values. They were just coming to very different conclusions. Hi, Jerome. How you doing? If you have any questions, let me know. They need to be about humanism, though. So there you go. It is very hard for humanists to come up with a consensus, and a lot of times on a lot of moral issues we don't. Humanism is considered a personal practice. It's not something that we impose on other people. It's a choice. And in that sense, there really is no, like, I'm never going to tell someone else that they're wrong the way they're applying their moral values. It's right for them, as long as they're doing that. You're going to have to text your question, Jerome. So there you have it. Are we vegetarians? Are humanists vegetarians? The answer is no. Some of us are, some of us aren't. Do we believe in just war? Some of us do, some of us don't. Is any particular war just, even if we do agree that there's a just war? Some of us do, some of us don't. The value system is based on compassion. What does the most good and the least harm? And again, what you know about any given situation really dictates whether you think any given situation is moral or not. So there you are. Now, when it comes to ethics, I think a lot of times people look at ethics and they think it's a set of rules. And ethics really isn't a set of rules. This is why humanists don't have any dogma. We have a set of values, and we apply those values to the situation that we find ourselves in, and go from there. So we do apply them situationally. I did a class a couple of weeks ago on ethics, and that was, what we discussed. Okay, we care about people. It's a compassion-based ethic. It's a rational ethics. It's based on the consequences to the here and now. We're not that concerned with what happens in an afterlife. If you are, that's fine for you. That just doesn't enter into humanist rational ethics. And then we apply it situationally, because there's always exceptions to the rules. And the example I gave in the class was my son, one time, he's 6 now, I found him with a mouthful of pennies. And new rule, don't put pennies in your mouth. If it's not food, it doesn't belong in your mouth. Very simple rule. Pretty much everyone will agree with that, right? If it's not food, it doesn't belong in your mouth. And then my sister pointed out that, well, toothbrushes aren't food, and yet they belong in your mouth. And I thought, yes, that's true. There's always an exception to the rule. And that's why humanists embrace situational ethics as opposed to absolute ethics. It's not about the rules. It's about the intent behind the rule that makes all the difference. And if you don't understand what the intent is, then you're not really going to be able to apply the morality that's behind the rule to yourself or to the situation you find yourself in when the situation calls for you to be flexible. So with the don't put anything that's not food in your mouth, the intent behind that is for him to not choke on things, right? To not put toys in his mouth, and to not do anything that would hurt himself. And once we understand that that's the reasoning behind it, it becomes a lot easier to go, okay, a toothbrush isn't going to hurt you, it's actually going to do well. So even though it's not food, you can in fact put it in your mouth and brush your teeth because it will help. So there you go. Again, this all comes back to vegetarianism and our humanist vegetarians, and no, we're not. Some of us are, some of us aren't. It all depends on how you apply your morality to the question of animal welfare and animal rights. And humanists haven't created a consensus on that. So the next question that arises from this is how do we create a consensus when there's a disagreement amongst humanists about what is or is not moral? And the answer to that is that we debate it. If you've got a moral position that you want other humanists to adopt, you present it to them. And you say, this is why I think it's the moral thing to do, or this is why I think it's moral. And they will ask you questions, and they will go all Socratic on you and find out your reasoning and see if they agree with it. They'll find out whether you've got the facts to back it up. They'll find out whether they think you're applying the values the way they would. And if they do, they'll agree with you and they'll change their position. And if they don't, they won't. And there's no way to force a group of humanists to agree with you. You have to argue your case. That's all there is to it. You have to argue your case, which makes it all the more surprising when we do, in fact, agree on something. Like, when we agree that a woman should have a right to choose, it means that the case has been made throughout the humanist community that this is, in fact, the moral position, even though abortion is obviously the killing of a potential human. It's killing a baby inside a woman's belly. And we still think a woman should. All right, so we're talking about how we create consensus amongst humanists, and again, we're going to argue our case to each other, and unless we agree that someone's made a good case, we're not going to agree with them. And we were just talking about the question of abortion, and humanists do agree that a woman should have a right to choose, even though abortions are kind of horrifying when you think about what it is you're actually doing. And the reason for that is, generally speaking, we know it's kind of a lesser of two evils, right? If you don't allow women to get safe abortions, they get unsafe ones, and then women die, and when women die, their baby dies as well. So I kind of look at it and say, well, okay, we're going to end up with two people dead instead of the one baby dead. And I don't like the one baby being dead either, but out of the two, that's where I'm going to fall out, do the most good and the least harm. I think what humanists would like to see, and I think most people would like to see this, is the need for abortions to be reduced. And you do that by reducing the number of unplanned pregnancies. And you do that through education. All right. So the humanist viewpoint on this is, yeah, we don't want to see abortions either, but if a woman needs an abortion, she should have access to a safe abortion. Because there's nothing you and I can say that's going to prevent a woman who wants an abortion from getting an abortion. I mean, that's reality. That's what we know from the historical record. Women are been getting abortions for the entirety of human history, and they might as well be safe. On the other hand, we'd like to prevent women from needing that option in the first place, so let's give them control of their fertility. Let's give women the tools they need to plan their pregnancies, so that we reduce the incidences of women feeling like their only option is to kill their child. And women do get to that point. And even with education and access to the tools a woman can use to plan pregnancies and control her fertility, there's still going to be situations that arise when women are going to need abortions for very good reasons. And it's unfortunate to think that people get in that situation, but it happens. Even with planned pregnancies, you know, it can happen. So, yeah, when humanists get to the point where we have an agreement on something like that, it's been well thought out. It's not an arbitrary position that the majority of humanists hold. We've argued it. We've debated it. And we've decided that given what we know about the situation, this is the best course of action. It's going to be the most moral because it's going to cause the least amount of harm and do the most amount of good. You know, so there you go. It's not about dogma. We wouldn't enforce that on anybody. And there's always individual humanists who don't agree with things. But when it comes to the major issues that humanists have agreed on, those are really rare. I mean, if you get in a group of 100 people, 100 humanists, 99 of them are going to be opposed to the death penalty. You're going to find one who, you know, thinks it's a good idea, one or two, but most of us are going to think it's a human rights abuse. And the reason we think it's a human rights abuse has to do with the fact that there's alternatives to the death penalty. And not just that. Here's the question that a humanist asks when we're considering a public policy. When we're considering a public policy issue, here's the question we ask: what are we trying to accomplish with the public policy? Is the proposed public policy going to work? And what are our other alternatives? And will those alternatives work better? And with the death penalty, what we're trying to do is we've got someone who's committed a crime, say murder, and we want to reduce the number of murders that are occurring, right? We want to reduce violent crime. Well, how do we do that? Well, if we've convicted someone of murder, we can put them in jail and prevent them from committing any more murders. All right? So that's one way to do it. We can kill them, sure. That's another way to do it. But when you're looking at put them in prison for life or killing them, you know, you have to make a really good case why killing would be better than putting them in prison for life. And when you look at the the stacks on this, it's way more expensive to kill them than to keep them in prison for life. It's really, 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 really expensive. So you're not saving any money doing that. And you're not preventing people outside of prison from committing new crimes, because the death penalty doesn't have a deterrent effect. You know, the places with the death penalty have greater crime rates than places without the death penalty. So just the opposite seems to be true. So what are you trying to do by killing them? You know, that's the question we humanists are asking, and we've never gotten a good answer to that. There's, you know, well, they deserve to die. Well, that's a revenge thing. That's an emotional thing. That's not a rational answer to the question, and I can understand why people would feel that way. But should that be public policy? You know, no, I don't think so. You know, let's do the most good and the least harm. That's how we decide things. And again, we don't always agree, but that's how we're deciding things. So then we go back to the real question. It's like, well, how do we prevent murders and violent crimes? Well, it seems that the more cops you have on the street, the less crime you have. That's one way. You need to increase the likelihood that someone's going to get caught. That's another way. And it has nothing to do with what the punishment is after they're caught. That doesn't have as much an effect as the guarantee that they're going to get caught in the first place. So, you know, again, humanists look at the death penalty, and the overwhelming majority of us think, well, okay, there doesn't seem to be a good reason to do this. It's the taking of someone's life, and we don't really get anything out of it. And furthermore, it's the taking of someone's life. I don't feel I have the right to kill anybody. So, you know, why would I go that route? So there you go. We don't agree on anything, and the things we do agree on have been argued, and we've gotten to the point that we agree. So there you go. Let's talk a little bit about critical thinking. Humanists use critical thinking skills, free thought, reason, logic, scientific method, because what we really are trying to do is find out what's really happening. When we talk about ethics, the ethics of a public policy, what we know really needs to be so, because our morality depends, our application of morality totally depends on what is true and what's not. And when humanists look at problem solving, we want to be effective. We want to actually solve our problems. That means we have to know what's causing the problem. We have to know what might solve that problem. And we don't want to base our conclusions on assumptions. We want to know what's really happening and what we can really do to solve our problems. And so to do that, we use critical thinking skills. We apply science, we apply reason, we apply logic, and we apply free thinking. Free thought really kind of involves you asking yourself a series of questions. How do I know what I think I know? And is what I know so in the first place? Because when it comes to solving your problems, it's not the stuff you know that trips you up. It's the stuff you think you know that isn't so that causes you all the problems. So it's worthwhile to find out what's real and what's not. Because reality, it turns out, matters tremendously. And no, you don't get to make your own reality. Sorry, you don't get to make your own reality. So, we use free thought. We challenge our own thinking. We challenge our own assumptions. How do I know what I know? And is what I know even so? And then, to answer those questions, we apply science. We try to be as objective as possible and to eliminate our subjective thought as much as possible. Now, I'm not saying gut instinct doesn't play a role in our thinking. It obviously does. But when it comes to finding out what's true, we recognize that our senses are flawed. Our perceptions can be flawed. I mean, you know, what comes through the eyes and actually gets interpreted by the brain can be very, very, very different in different cases. And it's not even a question of like color blindness, right? Some people have blind spots in their eye and they don't see things. What we think we see is biased by our preconceived notions. So humanists use free thought to try and eliminate that as much as possible, and then we try and double check that through science. We really like science. If someone comes up with a better way to find objective truth, so we're talking about the scientific method. If someone comes up with a better way to find out what is objectively true than science, humanists will embrace it. But right now, the scientific method it's a really great tool for eliminating the biases that are inherent in human perception. And that makes it wonderful to find out what's objectively true and not just what we assume to be true. And then the next thing that's kind of important to the critical thinking skill is reason and logic. When you look at logic and a statement of an argument that's being made, usually there's some premises and then there's a conclusion from the premises. So an example would be, let me think of an example here. All cats are animals. That's a premise. All animals can jump. That's a premise. Therefore, all cats can jump. All right, that's an argument that's being made. I'm arguing that all cats can jump by saying that all cats are animals. All animals can jump. Therefore, all cats can jump. Well, cats are in fact animals, so my first statement is true, but my second statement isn't, because it turns out that not all animals can jump. All right. So even though most cats can jump, except for those that have injuries, I can't necessarily conclude that all cats can jump based on my argument, because my argument, the logic of the argument itself wasn't valid, partially because one of my premises wasn't true. So you do have to know whether your premises in any given argument is true to know whether logic is good. And then you also have to understand the rules of logic, because even if all animals could jump, the question is, can I assume that all cats can jump just because they're all animals? Well, the answer to that would be a good yes. Now, does that make it true? No, because it's just an argument, all right? An argument, as good as an argument might be formed, still has to rely on observation. And the other thing that we can't do is prove a negative. We can't prove that all animals can jump, even if every animal we ever see can jump, because there might be an animal that we haven't seen that can't jump. So all conclusions in science are considered conditional upon new evidence. We might find out that they're false, and humanists are fine with that uncertainty. We're fine with that. A lot of people aren't. We are, because you sometimes just have to go with the best information you have available, as long as you're willing to change your mind should it turn out that you were wrong. And newsflash, at some point we're all going to be wrong. Not a big deal. Correct your mistakes as quickly as you can and you'll be just fine. So, yes, science. Love it! The next thing that falls into how we make decisions is not just that, we're trying to do moral reasoning and we want to know what's true. Then, like I said, you have the logic. And this is where it gets really, 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 really fun, because doing logic requires knowing what logical fallacies are. And you can spend days just enjoying yourself looking at what people are saying to see if it's logical or not, and to teach yourself what logical fallacies are. And by teaching yourself that, you become more aware of when you yourself engage in logical fallacies. And as good as you might be, you're going to engage in them every once in a while. It's just part of the fact that our brains do not think as rationally as would be ideal. So being humble about what it is you know, because what you know might not be so, and being open to changing your mind about what you think is so, based on evidence, is considered a virtue by humanists. We don't view it as a weakness. It's a virtue. Because the only thing worse than being wrong is to continue being wrong when you've been shown that you are wrong, out of pride, right? Humanists want to correct ourselves as much as possible because we'd like to be right rather than wrong, and our pride has nothing to do with it. Just suck it up, know you're going to make mistakes, accept that you're going to make mistakes, and be open to people correcting you, because that's better than continuing to be wrong. Okay, so let's see. what else do we got? We got a few minutes left. How do we apply this to everyday decision making? Well, we were talking about public policy at the beginning, so let's bring this back into public policy. It turns out that this is like where being a humanist and thinking rationally and having a compassion-based ethic really, really helps, because we're coming into an election season, right? Next year we have to elect a president. And what we have to do collectively, and not just our presidents, but our representatives as well, and our city councils and stuff, is find out whether we believe the politicians or not, whether we think they're right. And politicians, they like to spin the facts to their advantage, and sometimes outright lie. So knowing whether you're being lied to or not versus just having the facts done is something you should know. And you need science and the willingness to challenge your own assumptions. Even if you like someone, it's worthwhile to find out whether they're telling you the truth or not. Even if they're telling you things you want to hear, especially if they're telling you things you want to hear. It's good to find out whether they're telling the truth. You also want to find out, for humanists, whether their policies are optimally compassionate, they're optimally moral or not. And, how do you apply reality and compassion to public policy? That's the question we humanists are always asking ourselves. How do we do that? And how well do our politicians stack up? And the obvious answer is not, generally speaking, not very well, with a few exceptions. And there's always going to be a few exceptions, and that's fine too. But when we're evaluating what they're telling us, we're trying to figure out, A, whether we agree with them, but B, whether they even have facts at their disposal. And this is one of the reasons why I think with the evolution question, do you believe in evolution, has kind of become a critical question for humanists evaluating presidential candidates. I really don't care what religion someone practices, but if they're going to be president, I want to know that they have the ability to distinguish between facts versus assumptions. Because I don't want public policy being made on assumptions. As much as possible, I want it to be made on facts. And if someone is incapable of making decisions based on facts because they are incapable of figuring out what the facts are, that I think is a problem for a public official. I want reality-based decision-making. That's how I do it as a humanist, as much as possible. And that's what I'd prefer our public policy was based on. Does that mean we're going to agree? No, there's going to be legitimate differences, even amongst people who are reality-based and compassion-based. And that's fine, but at least we can have a discussion, a rational discussion about that, versus, talking to someone who's off in left field, ignoring the facts completely because they can't be bothered to find out whether what they think is even so. And that worries me tremendously. It doesn't, if you're an individual and you want to live in a fantasy world and you don't care whether what you know is so or not, you're going to go for it anyways. Well, that's fine. The person who has to live with those consequences is you. But when you're a public official, the people, plural, that have to live with the consequences of what you're deciding is all of us. So you're not just impacting yourself when you're a public official, you're impacting everyone else, and I would prefer that you be reality-based. Just my preference there. So to recap, do humanists agree on public policy? No, we don't. Are we all vegetarians? No, we're not. Some of us are, some of us aren't. What do we agree on? Well, we think women should have a right to choose, regardless of how horrible an abortion sounds like, and it does sound horrible. Do we agree on whether there's just wars? No. Did we agree on Iraq? No. Do we agree on the death penalty? Pretty much. We think it should be abolished. And what we're doing is we're applying ethics. The reasoning behind the ethics, we don't have a set of rules. It's not dogmatic. To us, the rules are less important than the values and the reasoning that's behind the rules. And so that's where we spend our time. And so we spend a lot of time with reason and logic and science to sort out our morality and our problem solving, because we want to do the best problem solving we can do. We want to be the best people we can be, and we want to make the best decisions we can that are going to benefit not only ourselves, but everyone else as well.